Just making an ordinary adventure here, ordinary fantasy. Nothing extraordinary happens in this picture at all.
For casting, I think that half of what a director does is cast his picture well. I like people who are outspoken and who are very large, so I can bring them down to life level. See that King Kong dialogue when they run with the river. They haven't made a movie like that since King Kong.
So there's a lot of what the...
Wow, his charisma is 12. Ha ha.
Cut, great. Very nice.
Elliot's a normal, everyday kid growing up in arcades, playing asteroids, and he's at that stage where he's just bored with everything around him. Elliot's not me, but he's the closest thing to my experience in my life growing up in suburbia.
Steven Spielberg has been one of the most loved directors from the 70s until today. He actually made films in the 60s, right here, but his professional career didn't start until the 70s. Steven was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on December 18, 1947. He was the oldest of 4 children, born to Arnold and Leah. Arnold was an electrical engineer and Leah was a concert pianist. By the time Steven was 16, he actually made his first film. It was a 2-hour-long film called Firelight, and it was shown to local theaters nearby, so he quickly made back the $500 he'd used to make it. In high school, Steven was a C student, which meant he didn't have the greatest grades, so that affected his chances of getting into UCLA, one of his dream schools. But instead, because he didn't make it into UCLA, he went to Long Beach State. And because Long Beach didn't have a film program or anything along the lines, he actually studied and majored in English, which would soon, you'd think, benefit him in screenwriting and just storytelling in general, which was really beneficial. A little bit before college, when Steven was 17 and still in high school, he said that he would sneak into the Universal Studios backlots and watch movies being filmed. He said he did this for around 2 years until a guy named Chuck Silvers caught him. Chuck was super understanding, and actually they started talking about movies and Steven's passions, and they ended up watching a few of Steven's 8mm films. All Chuck could do was wish him the best of luck because he wasn't in a position to give him any opportunities or any jobs at Universal, but he did wish him the best of luck. While in college, Steven finally got a job at Universal Studios. While there, he put out his first professional short film. It was a 26-minute film called Amblin. It came out in 1968 and was about a man hitchhiking across Southern California. He comes across a woman, and they seem like they fall in love. This short film won an award at the Venice Film Festival. It also got him a 7-year contract to the studio that he used to crash, Universal Studios. The next professional project Spielberg had was called Duel. It was a TV series. It took 16 days to film and $350,000 to produce. It earned $5 million overseas and was a hit. It also won a lot of awards. So after this, Spielberg was more recognized and he was offered a lot more scripts than he was before. He decided to take the time off and create his own project called Sugarland Express. When her child is put into a foster home, Lou Jean Poplin forces her husband Clovis to escape a pre-release prison farm to rescue the child. She steals a police car and kidnaps a highway patrolman, and they begin a cross-country low-speed chase for the child. The Sugarland Express was a critical success, but a commercial failure. That means moviegoers and media critics loved it, but the movie made no profit. That's when Spielberg sat down and had to make a new plan. His next film would be Jaws.
Jaws is a movie that came out in 1975. It's about a big shark that ate people. People went chasing after the shark. It stars Roy S., Robert S., and Richard D.
Nice. That's good. Like Carson said, Jaws stars Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw. The film became one of the first blockbuster films and was also the first one to reach $100 million in the box office. Because Jaws focused on character development, a lot of the lines were ad-libs, which meant they were very spontaneous and the actors came up with it on the spot.
Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chump some of this shit.
The next line that Captain Brody shares with us was actually considered one of the top 10 most famous lines that was spontaneously added by the actor.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
The three categories that Jaws won Oscars for was score, sound mixing, and editing.
For Best Achievement in Film Editing, the nominees are
Dee Allen for Dog Day Afternoon,
Verna Fields for Jaws, and the winner is
Indiana, 8668.
Verna Fields for Jaws.
And the winner is Robert L. Hoyt, Roger Heeman, Earl Mallory, and John Carter for Jaws.
The nominees for the Best Original Dramatic Score are Bullet.
John Williams for Jaws.
And the winner is John Williams for Jaws.
For giving me the opportunity to work with an extraordinary man, Steven Spielberg.
Unlike Sugarland Express, Jaws was a commercial and a critical success. Spielberg was now in the position where he could do whatever he felt. After Jaws was released in 1975 and had won the 3 Oscars, he went on a spree of producing, writing, and directing so many new movies that won and were nominated for the Oscars. In 1977, Spielberg was nominated for Best Director for creating Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Next came the film 1941 and then Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he was also nominated for Best Director. In 1982, Spielberg released E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which was groundbreaking and was actually nominated for Best Picture. In the same year, he also released Poltergeist. After that came Twilight Zone the movie, and then Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom had actually received the first rated R title. In 1985, he released The Color Purple, which was nominated for Best Picture but didn't win. After that, he created Empire of the Sun, Always, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and then came Hook. In 1993, he created Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. Schindler's List was nominated and won Best Picture of the Year. In 1997, Spielberg released Jurassic Park and the Lost World, which was actually at the time one of the most top-grossing movies of all time. In the same year, he created Amistad. In 1998, he released Saving Private Ryan, which actually won the Best Picture of the Year. Between the years 2001 and 2004, he released AI, Artificial Intelligence, Catch Me If You Can, Minority Report, and The Terminal. In 2005, he released War of the Worlds and Munich, which was nominated for Best Picture but didn't win. The next year, in 2006, he created Letters to Iwo Jima, which was also nominated for Best Picture. The films that followed that were Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, The Adventures of Tintin, and War Horse. War Horse was actually nominated for Best Picture but it didn't win. In 2012, his film Lincoln was nominated for Best Picture but it didn't win, and then in 2015, his film Bridge of Spies was nominated but it didn't win either. His 3 latest films have been The BFG, The Big Friendly Giant, The Post, and Ready Player One. The Post was actually nominated and didn't win Best Picture, but it was a really good film, and it was actually the film that I decided to watch for this project. The Post, obviously directed by Steven Spielberg, was a dramatic thriller released in 2017. It starred people like Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks, Sarah Paulson, Alison Brie, Matthew Rhys, and Jesse Plemons. The theme of this movie and the story, because it's based on a true story actually, is really interesting because it talks about the difference between moral actions and legal actions, and what you decide to do because of your moral decision, or you do something because it's legal or illegal. The first person I want to introduce is Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel is a LA Times journalist who went to the Vietnam War and saw combat and was actually physically there to see everything. And he came back with the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, played by Bruce Greenwood in the film. After Daniel realizes the lies that are being told to the public about the chances of winning the Vietnam War and the safety of their boys, he decides to sneak into the Pentagon and steal what we know as today as the Pentagon Papers. Once he steals over thousands and thousands of documents revealing secrets from previous years and other documents like that, he decides to take them home, copy all of them, and release them to the public. Now the LA Times has revealed the deepest, darkest secrets of the government at the time, and the government isn't so happy with it, obviously. So the government tries the LA Times, and they get them into trouble, and right now they're being, blocked and monitored and suppressed. Now if we rewind to the Washington Post, owned by Katharine Graham, played by Meryl Streep in the film, she is a family-owned business, and it is smaller at the time. They're watching all of this play out in front of them, and then finally, a woman with a box of over 4,000 of those secret documents that we were talking about earlier came in and dropped them off at the Washington Post offices. After the Washington Post hadn't been receiving any good news, and the only thing they were covering was Nixon's daughter's wedding, they debated on whether or not posting the papers that were dropped off in their office. If they were to follow through and release the papers, they would be in a similar situation as LA Times. They would be blocked and monitored, but if not, they would stay the way they are and they wouldn't have to worry about any government issues. Ben Bradlee, played by Tom Hanks in the film, is all for releasing the papers. He is one of the main editors of the Washington Post and has a big influence on what Katharine Graham, the owner, has to say about releasing them or not. Keep in mind that other editors and writers of the Washington Post really don't want to post them because it would alter and change their lifestyle. Over the phone, Ben Bradlee and Katharine Graham and a few other editors talk about whether or not they want to post it. Finally, Katharine Graham gives them the go to post the articles and post all of the papers that they had and the secret documents out to the public. The next day from the day they released the papers, they realized that 10 to 15 other businesses that fed off of news in the public did the same thing. They took these sheets of papers and the documents and they revealed them to the public. If we stop and we look at where we're at in the story right now, it's the LA Times being in a bit of a pickle and not being able to post and they're being monitored. But the other ones who haven't said anything are saying something now, and it's just this big lineup of free speech related businesses versus the government. Personally, if you see the government trying to suppress and monitor the free speech and after being lied to and the evidence, as a person you wouldn't trust the government, I would assume. One of the shots near the end of the movie is in front of a courthouse, and it is there because they finally had the vote and it was 6-3 to free the press. Personally, I really enjoyed everyone who was starring in this film and had minor roles. Matthew Rhys, the man who played Daniel Ellsworth, did a fantastic job at portraying someone who would be very strong-headed and very motivated to do the right thing. He also did a fantastic job at portraying how stressful and anxious these acts that he was doing really were. For example, the scenes where he's walking into the Pentagon and out of the Pentagon with the papers was very stressful, and personally it made me a little anxious. Bruce Greenwood did a fantastic job at portraying someone who wouldn't lose anything to humility, Robert McNamara, the man who lied to the public. He did a great job at making everyone kind of hate him.
On and on and on. My son is home now and safe, thank God. But you watched him go. You knew we couldn't win over there for years and years and years, and yet you let so many of our friends send our boys off.
Okay, we were doing the best we could.
Meryl Streep, who plays Katharine Graham in the film, does a fantastic job at owning the small family business. She shows how, stressful it is and how scary it is to be a woman at the time owning a business like that. She was told by other reporters on the Washington Post that people might not want to invest in their time and their money into the Washington Post because she's a female. She doesn't let that bother her, and Meryl Streep shows a great attitude towards this issue. Her posture towards everything just shows real hard work and passion for what she wants to do, which is to own the business and keep it running, whether that means to keep it a small business or a big business. Tom Hanks plays Ben Bradlee, a really consistent, hard-headed man. Tom Hanks does an incredible job at, representing a relentless and selfless writer who would stay up all night to share the most important stories. Overall, I think Tom Hanks was definitely casted correctly for this role. Ben Bagdikian, played by Bob Odenkirk, did a fantastic job at showing, how stressful it is to go from one place to another. He was the main source for the Washington Post from getting, the papers back and forth, and he was the one who ultimately brought all of the secret sheets to the house that they were going to publish and write and release to the public. I'm assuming having that job is super stressful and scary, so a great job at bringing the anxiety to the table. The story is told in a linear fashion from the time that Daniel was in Vietnam writing and journaling for the LA Times to the moment he gets back on the plane and witnesses Robert's lies to the public, to the time that LA Times actually got tried and sued for releasing these papers. Eventually we can see near the end of the movie that they won 6-3 and the press was freed, and after that we see a Watergate break-in, which actually leads into a whole other situation that they could make a whole other movie about. Dialogue is super important in this film because it is character driven and characters are learning throughout the film. But there are some really important lines in the film that were very, influential, but also informational, and also just really interesting lines that I think, stood out, and I could remember after watching the film days after.
Father gave the paper to her husband. The only reason she's running things is because Phil died. Don't get me wrong, I think she is a lovely woman, but she got rid of Al Friendly and brought in a pirate who does nothing but bleed our margins. I mean, you can't be surprised that the buyers are concerned that she doesn't have the resolve to turn a serious profit. Okay, it's your decision. But in my opinion, if you want this to be more than a little family paper, it has to be more than a little family business.
Thank you, Arthur.
I think this scene is super important because, especially during the time, it's the 60s and 70s, Kay or Catherine is in charge of a business, and there were scenes where she would walk in and be the only woman in the room, speaking on behalf of the Washington Post or, any news-related business.
When they don't just look past you, when to them, you're not even there. When that's been your reality for so long, it's hard not to let yourself think it's true. So to make this decision, to risk her fortune and the company that's been her entire life, well, I think that's brave.
I think it was super important to recognize how this affected our perspective on, Kay and her place and her role during this time. She is a woman, again, in charge of a business, soon to be a big business, and she's making these decisions with a lot of bravery. I don't know what I would do in that situation because I just am not in that situation. I know that you can't please everyone, and I think that's what Tony is telling Ben in this scene, and that, she's telling us too, that no matter what way that Kay goes, not everyone's going to be happy, especially the government. This is Josh Singer and Elizabeth Hanna, the two screenwriters behind The Post. Other than The Post, Hanna has worked on All the Bright Places, Skin, Hello Apartment, and in 2019, the film Long Shot will be released, and she will have been a part of that as well. She said what inspired her to write the screenplay was after reading Catherine's memoir. She said her husband told her to just write it in 3 months, and if it was good, you have written it, and if it wasn't good, then it's all right. Josh's work before The Post included Spotlight, First Man, and The Fifth Estate. After First Man was released, Josh Singer was nominated for the Critics' Choice Movie Awards for Best Adapted Screenplay, as well as a BAFTA Award for the Best Adapted Screenplay. Janusz Kaminski has been the eye for Steven Spielberg for a lot of his films. Even though Kaminski has been a part of many iconic and influential films, to me personally, I don't see him any different than a lot of other DPs. Nothing really stands out to me that makes me think, oh, this is a Kaminski film. The Post's editor, Michael Kahn, has been with Spielberg just as long as Janusz Kaminski, maybe even longer. Kahn's edited films from Schindler's List all the way to the Indiana Jones series. Kahn knew how to craft a story and, master creative editing, which would soon later win him many awards. really enjoyed that sequence because it was so unique, and I honestly had never seen anything like it before. The newspaper's being printed, but you're getting different views and different shots of, you know, where it is, at what time.
Frankly, above your pay grade.
Well, there's a few above yours on, like fucking freedom of the press.
Let's just be civil if we can.
Do you think Nixon is going to be civil? He is trying to censor the goddamn New York Times.
Yes, the Times, not the Post.
It's the same damn thing. This is an historic fight. If they lose, we lose.
Hello, someone on the phone. This is Phil.
Is that Phil Jalen?
Yes, Mrs. Graham.
Good. I'd like you to weigh in if you would, because I want to know what the staff is feeling about this.
Well, frankly, Mrs. Graham, Ben Bagdikian and Chow Roberts have both threatened to resign. If we don't publish, that is.
Come on, Kay, what do you expect?
They got nothing to lose. Due respect, we all have everything to lose if we don't publish. What will happen to the reputation of this paper? Everyone will find out we had the study. Hell, I bet half the town knows already. What will it look like if we sit on our asses?
It'll look like we were prudent.
It will look like we were afraid. We will lose. The country will lose. Nixon wins. Nixon wins this one and the next one and all the ones after that because we were scared. Because the only way to assert the right to publish is to publish.
Fritz. Is Fritz there? Fritz, are you on?
I'm here, Kay.
What do you think? What do you think I should do?
I think there are arguments on both sides. But I guess I wouldn't publish.
Let's go. Let's do it. Let's go. Let's publish.
The phone call scene was actually my favorite. Just as much as it was a big part of the plot, it was the most intense scene that I had watched throughout the entire film. The quick cuts back and forth really kind of stressed me out a little bit because part of me is leaning and saying that she won't do it, and the other part of me is saying that she will. Genuinely watching that scene made my hairs go up, and I kind of got like, my heartbeat started racing a little bit, and I think that scene was really well done and a beautiful shot too. Rick Carter was the Post set design, and he did a phenomenal job. He's done so many different films, from Avatar, Forrest Gump, to Jurassic Park. Something that I noticed in his lists of set design was they all had to do with either time going backwards or time going forwards. For example, he did Back to the Future Part 2, which went from 1985 to 1955 to way in the future. He mastered all those set designs with specific furniture, homes, architecture, and etc. He did the same thing with Warhorse. Warhorse took place in World War I, and he mastered the set design there as well. Examples include Munich, which took place in the 70s, Lincoln, which took place in the late 1800s. Now the Post takes place in the early 60s and the late 70s. When you think of the late 60s and the early 70s, one would think of the hippie era. But because journalism was sometimes more of a white-collar job and you were sitting in an office, he did a perfect job at showing the hippie side outside of the office, but inside it was very uptight and they wore suits, and it made a lot of sense. After learning all this about Spielberg, I think that his main legacy has to do with youth and imagination and creativity. I believe as he's growing old, he's learning more about youth and about imagination than he ever had before. He deserves all the fame and all the credit for his endless imagination.